you have talked yourself out of something again. Maybe it was the business idea you almost pitched, the investment you almost made, the job you almost applied for, the conversation you almost started. You got close enough to feel the possibility, and then something inside you ran the numbers and decided it was too dangerous, too uncertain, too much could go wrong. And so you step back. You called it being realistic, being responsible, being smart. But here is what you probably did not notice somewhere else in the world. Someone with similar information, similar resources, and similar odds looked at that exact same situation and saw something completely different. They saw an opportunity. They moved. And the gap between your life and theirs grew a little wider. This is not about courage. It is not about recklessness. It is not about having a higher tolerance for failure. It is about something far more specific, a fundamental difference in how the brain of a successful person processes risk compared to how yours has been trained to process it. And once you understand that difference, you can begin to close the gap. To understand why some people move while others hesitate, we first need to understand how the brain actually interprets risk. The first thing psychology teaches us about risk is that it is not an objective fact. It is an interpretation. Two people can look at the same opportunity, the same odds, the same potential upside, the same potential downside, and experience it completely differently. One feels excitement, the other feels dread. Same data, opposite reactions. The difference is not in the opportunity, it is in the nervous system evaluating it. Psychologist Paul Slovic, one of the world's leading researchers on risk perception, demonstrated through decades of research that how we perceive risk is shaped far more by psychological factors than by actual probability. Our past experiences, our emotional state, our sense of control, our familiarity with the domain, all of these distort our risk assessment in ways we are almost entirely unaware of. This means that when you decide something is too risky, you are not making an objective calculation. You are making an emotional one and then dressing it up in the language of logic after the fact. Psychologists call this emotional reasoning. You feel afraid, therefore the risk must be real. You feel uncertain, therefore the outcome must be negative. The feeling comes first, the justification comes second. Successful people are not immune to this process, but they have learned, often through repeated experience, to identify when their risk assessment is being driven by emotion rather than evidence. That distinction is everything. And once you understand that risk is largely an interpretation, another difference begins to emerge. One of the most consistent findings in research on high performers and successful entrepreneurs is how differently they evaluate the structure of risk compared to the average person. Most people evaluate risk symmetrically. They look at what they could lose and what they could gain and weigh them against each other. But because of loss aversion, the neurological reality that losses feel twice as painful as equivalent gains feel rewarding, this calculation is always tilted toward inaction. The potential loss looms larger than the potential gain, even when the gain is objectively bigger. Successful people have learned to evaluate risk asymmetrically. They are not looking for situations where the odds are in their favor. They are looking for situations where the downside is limited and defined, but the upside is large and open-ended. They ask a different question entirely. Not what is the probability of failure, but if this fails, what exactly do I lose and can I absorb that? Investor and author Tim Ferriss calls this fear setting a structured practice of defining the worst realistic outcome of a decision in precise, concrete terms. Not the vague, catastrophic feeling of everything could go wrong, but the specific, actual consequence. What would really happen? How bad would it actually be? How long would it take to recover? Almost universally, when you force the worst case into concrete language, it shrinks. The vague dread becomes a manageable setback, and the asymmetry becomes visible, a limited, recoverable downside against a potentially life-changing upside. But beneath every risk calculation lies something even more important than the numbers themselves. Beneath every risk calculation is a belief about what failure means. And this is where the psychological difference between successful people and everyone else is most profound. For most people, failure is evidence. Evidence that they were wrong to try. Evidence that they are not capable. Evidence that the risk was not worth taking. Failure confirms the fear that was there from the beginning. And because failure feels like confirmation of inadequacy, the mind will do almost anything to avoid it, including avoiding the attempt entirely. Research by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck on what she calls the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset illuminates exactly this divide. People with a fixed mindset interpret failure as a reflection of their fixed abilities, proof of what they cannot do. People with a growth mindset interpret failure as information data about what needs to be adjusted, learned, or approached differently. These are not just different attitudes, they produce measurably different neurological responses to setbacks. Brain imaging studies show that people with a growth mindset show greater activity in the areas of the brain associated with learning and error correction when they fail. Their brains are literally using failure differently, extracting signal from it rather than shutting down in response to it. Successful people do not have a higher tolerance for failure because they feel it less. They have a higher tolerance for failure because they have fundamentally different beliefs about what it means. And that difference in thinking does not appear out of nowhere. Successful people also think differently about risk because they have had more practice thinking about risk. And that practice was not accidental. Psychologist Ellen Langer's research on what she calls mindful risk-taking shows that people who regularly engage in small, deliberate decisions under uncertainty develop a fundamentally more accurate and less fearful relationship with risk over time. They build what researchers call risk literacy, the ability to read uncertainty clearly rather than reacting to it emotionally. This is why the history of nearly every successful person includes a long period of small bets, small failures, and incremental exposure to uncertainty before the big breakthrough arrived. They were not born comfortable with risk. They trained themselves into comfort through accumulated experience. Each small risk taken and survived recalibrates the amygdala's threat response. Each failure navigated and recovered from builds evidence that failure is survivable. Each uncertain situation entered and exited expands the nervous system's tolerance for the unknown. Over time, what felt dangerous begins to feel like normal operating conditions. The person who has never taken a risk does not have a more accurate picture of danger. They have a more distorted one because their threat database has never been updated with real experience. The encouraging part is that none of this is fixed. It is a product of experience, belief, and habit, all of which can be changed. Start with the asymmetry question. Before you talk yourself out of something, stop and ask, what is the actual worst case here, in concrete terms? Write it down, give it a specific shape, then ask, is this survivable? How long would recovery take? Now look at the upside. Is it open-ended? Could it compound? Is the asymmetry in your favor? Most of the time, when you force this analysis, you will find that the risk is far more manageable than the feeling suggested, and the potential upside far more significant than your fear allowed you to see. Then take the smallest version of the risk you can identify, not to avoid commitment, but to begin building the experiential database your nervous system needs to recalibrate. Every small bet taken, every small failure survived, every small uncertainty navigated makes the next level of risk more accessible. Successful people are not braver than you. They are more experienced with their own fear. They have learned that the feeling of risk and the reality of risk are two very different things, and they have stopped letting the feeling make their decisions. You can learn the same thing, but you have to start somewhere. Start this week. Start small. Start now.